All right, I am back, and I am now a PLO player, believe it or not. Over the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, I no longer play poker professionally, but I still take it very seriously, play a lot in my free time, study a lot in my free time. And I've gone from playing no limit hold'em tournaments to mostly playing PLO cash games. It just seems like a more fun game, a lot more money in the games. Um, and so, yeah, I am back with a study video for myself of under the gun versus button, and we're going to be taking a look at ace high boards, or just today a single ace high board. Um, but before going over that, uh, why even make these videos? So first, I'm getting to the point in the games that I'm playing where the players, the regs especially, are studied enough. They're too good for me to have a large enough win rate in the games through just pure poker intuition, right? I can't just knit it up and value bet against the fish and use blockers to kind of make decent bluffs and calls against regs, um, and have a large win rate at 200 PLO or 500 PLO or whatever. Um, that might work at mid stakes and low stakes and probably in a lot of live games, but um, there's like a Tiger Woods video or clip when he first joined the PGA where he's talking about, I don't just want to beat these guys, I want to crush them. And I kind of feel the same way. I want to get very good at this game, and so to do that, you need to look at solvers. Um, but why even make videos, right? Mostly this is just to hold myself accountable. I don't think I'm particularly good at explaining things, and I have no, delusions or aspirations to become like a content creator or anything like that. But when I was playing No Limit professionally, a lot of my problems or my biggest leak was volume and like motivation and that kind of thing. And I think something that was very useful to make me study was to tell people like, hey, I'm going to actually study a spot once a week, twice a week, that kind of thing, and I'm going to do a video on it just to prove that I studied it. Uh, and study group doesn't really care. They're not going to watch the videos and confirm that or anything. There was no prop bet involved, but it was just kind of this mental thing where to me, everyone is aware that I should be doing this, and now there's this social pressure to do it. And this was pretty motivating. It worked, right? I got a lot better at No Limit Hold'em, and I had a lot of success at No Limit Hold'em by making those videos, showcasing kind of interesting spots, common spots that you would play in a No Limit tournament, um, and how the solver attacked them, and how population probably wasn't attacking them well enough. So, all right, yeah, that's kind of the why behind the videos, and why I'm now doing not no limit videos but PLO videos. So, all right, before I get into anything, um, I've been using Vision on Run It Once, and there is kind of this like I think we all agree, right? All of us in the PLO community agree that it's this like heinous act that Run It Once is committing, and no one's had the, I guess, the balls to stand up to them or fight for what's right kind of thing. And that is on two-tone boards. They inexplicably, right, unbelievably, egregiously call them single suit and abbreviated SS. We all know the only way, the correct way, the canonically correct way to call these boards is two-tone, TT. A single suit board is a monotone board, and so this is outrageous, ridiculous, unbelievable, right? And I'm fed up with it, and so I'm going to be calling two-tone boards as two-tone boards. I'm going to abbreviate them as TT. Um, Rainbow boards are obviously R. And, I have heard people call two-tone boards flush draw boards. I guess that's technically right. Go ahead. I'm open-minded. You can do whatever you want, really. Uh, but single suit, ridiculous. And you know what, Run It Once? I'm not gonna stand for it. So, all right. Originally, I had planned to do 3 boards, kind of with various reasons why. Ace King 5 was board 1. It has a Broadway and a low card. All Ace 10 9, Ace 7 5. They all have different types of cards, and ranges will play differently on these types of boards because of that. But I got through Ace King 5, and I have maybe 5 or 6 pages of notes. So I can't do all 3 of these boards, a rainbow and a two-tone version, in one video. I can barely do the Ace King 5 Rainbow one in a single video, without, I don't know what the right word is, but um, lots of notes and not short. So that's what we'll be doing, or at least what I'll be going over. So we know kind of what we're doing. We know why we're doing. But how we're going to do it is we're going to be using run at once vision, which is run at once's PLO solver that I pay for an annual subscription for, which is very good. And then the only downside is that for running river spots, you actually need to grab a script that they'll spit out for you and plug it into Monker solvers. So I'll be using vision and Monker solver for rivers, and then pre-flop, flop, and turn will all be in vision. So drink water. Anytime you want to study solver output, I think there are three big things that you need to ask yourself. First is, what is the solver doing and why? What about the ranges? What about the specific cards in that hand make the solver do what it's doing? And even more specifically, even more granular, what is it betting? What is it checking? And when it's betting, is it betting as a bluff? Is it betting for value? And when it checks, are we check raising this hand? Are we check folding it, check calling? Are we slow playing, or is it just a good enough hand to check call? That kind of thing. That's kind of important to understand. Okay, what do these cards interact with? The other range that make me want to do this thing. That's important. Even more important, how is population playing these spots differently? I don't know about you, but I have played tens of thousands of hands of PLO, and I would say that there is some play that is not solver approved in these games. And so there's going to be a lot of adjustments that we need to make, or a lot of things that we need to think, all right, the solver says it's doing X, but this guy and a lot of people in the games I'm playing are doing Y. And so we should adjust for that. And that's the most important thing when studying solver output is, how do we adjust? We need to exploit our opponents. We need to understand that they're not playing correctly, quote unquote correctly, and that gives us an opportunity to make even more money than the solver thinks we can. So it's important to attack that, and it's important to not fall for this kind of like busto American live reg mentality that I can read people. I'm a sicko exploiter. Solvers can't fold the nits, like all these things. Don't fall for that. That's just total bullshit. You can't really say someone is calling too much or folding too much or not bluffing enough if you don't even know what they're supposed to be calling or bluffing in the first place, right? You bluff and they call, and you're like, oh, this guy's calling way too much. I'm going to stop bluffing. But then the solver says your hand's, a terrible fucking bluff. And so, you're not exploiting the guy by not bluffing that. In the future, you're just kind of in no man's land. And so it's important as you advance in the game to actually study solvers and to actually learn from them and not fall for the busto reg psyop that you can make heaps by just, being James Bond or whatever, right? Don't fall for that. Okay, end of presentation. Let's hop into Vision and take a look at Under the Gun versus Button on Ace King 5. So, all right, first thing that should be apparent is this is one of the best boards for Under the Gun, right? We're going to have all of the aces, a decent amount of kings, and there's no straights on board, no flushes on board, that kind of thing. So we get to bet pretty frequently. We're going to be betting a lot of hands. We're going to be betting hands like aces, like kings, all of our sets, right? So it's also, first thing we're going to do is not make fun of me for showing my bookmarks bar. We're going to hide it. Second thing, we're going to look at all of our sets are probably going to see bet here, right? This makes sense. Ace, ace, king, king can probably check to slow play because what the hell are you even hoping to get called by? Some things that will bet that aren't showdown value are hands like queen, jack, 10. So I would call this a wrap. I guess the solver's going to call that an open ender. I mean, technically, I guess that's right. But, queen, jack, 10 hands, right? They're going to bet. Hands like jack, 10, 8, 7, just a pure gut shot. It's a bit thinner. Two backdoor flush draws, obviously we're going to bet, that kind of stuff. The hands that we're just going to check and check give up with are hands like 10, 9, 8, 7, these middling wraps, or middling rundowns, excuse me, not a wrap. You just have no hope. You don't block any calls. You unblock, like when you're bluffing, you're hoping your opponent has his hand. So blocking folds and unblocking calls is a pretty bad bluff. One thing that does end up happening is once you get even lower downstairs, so you have 8, 7, 6, 4, you actually start to bluff this hand. There's a lot of turns that you can pick up equity on, um, which is good. Good for a bluff. And you unblock, your opponent can have Jack 9 8 7. You don't unblock that hand, but you can get worse to fold, which is good. But one thing I will say is when you bet this hand, in position is supposed to fold a hand like Queen 10 9 8. I don't know about you guys, but I've seen lots of people call gut shots on the flop. So I'm not entirely sure that I would be c betting 8 7 6 4. I would probably, let's see here. I would probably c bet the ones with the backdoor flush draw and definitely the ones with two. But these rainbow ones, I may make an adjustment and say, you know what, I'm going to delay c bet this hand, just because even though we can turn, an open ender or a pair and a rat or a pair and a gut shot type of thing, I think the hand, like, I think there's a better way to make money by just delay c betting that hand as opposed to just c betting it pure on the flop. So, all right. We've seen the betting range. Checking range. So the checking range is going to be, well, I don't need to go to button, but a hand like ace queen 7 7 with a backdoor flush draw, probably going to check. Nut flush draw, you bet, you get raised. You kind of have to fold. It feels kind of bad. Two backdoor flush draws, you bet, you get raised. You'd have to fold, and that feels really bad. So I think I might just put these into my check call range, especially because I think when we bet, how often is in position supposed to raise king king? 7%. I think our opponents are raising king king literally always. I mean, not literally always, but half the time, 3/4 of the time, very frequently. And so, one that makes easier bet folds, but it's also going to happen more often. So these hands that really want to see a turn, again, it's 8 7 6 4 hands. Maybe those just go into the check call range or the bet fold range type of thing, because we're getting raised more often, and people are continuing in ways that they shouldn't be continuing. So all right, let's say instead of that we check and then in position bets, right? Our check raises are going to be hands like sets, right? Ace ace, king king. Even 5-5 gets in there sometimes. It prefers to have an ace. You can see like it massively bets way more often when you have ace 5-5. I don't know if this is only because you have ace ace 5-5 or what, but my theory is that this has way more clean outs against king king, which ends up being like kind of the boogeyman hand for under the gun against button. As we'll see later, that blocking kings or having equity against king king, it's like literally exactly king king, matters a lot for whatever the gun does. That's just kind of like the hand that button's going to flat a lot. It's going to be one of their strongest hands, if not the strongest hand on this board. And so we have to be, a lot of our decisions are going to be made around what if they have king king. Also worth noting that in position definitely does have some ace ace combos. So they're going to have, it's not often, but they will flat ace ace sometimes, right? And frequently like the worst ace ace. They're not going to have double suited aces that often. They'll have ace ace 6-3 rainbow, that kind of stuff. But unlike Hold'em, we can not totally rule out top set from our opponent. But all right, those are the kind of hands, or that's the kind of action that you can expect on the flop, and maybe some ideas about, well, I think button is continuing in ways that they probably shouldn't, or under the gun is c-betting a bit too much, that kind of stuff. Those are the things we need to think about, and maybe some adjustments on how to counter that. So all right, I want to look at 3 different turns. And we're going to go through the bet call line, because I think this is going to be the most common line that you're going to see, and the one that allows for the most playability on rivers, right? If it goes bet, raise, call, like SPR is going to be 1, and you're probably going to get it on the flop a lot. Check, raise, call, same thing. Check, raise, pot, all that stuff. You're probably not going to see a river with a lot of play. So all of these turns and rivers will be done through the bet call line. So first, bad turn for in position or for out of position is completes a straight, brings back the flush draw. So what are we betting? We're obviously going to bet hands like queen jack, and especially if we don't have spades, right? Free spades makes a lot of sense too. Like you just kind of block all their continues. Like your hand's like too good, especially when you bet and don't get raised on the flop. Um, they don't really have a set that often. Even though they're supposed to only raise kings 7% of the time, I think that's happening a lot more. I think that you can be pretty assured that their continuing range is really, really weak, or like it's just non-existent when you have multiple spades here. But queen jack without spades can definitely get called by a flush draw, two pair with a flush draw, ace 5 4 3, those types of hands, pair and a gut shot, that kind of stuff. So that seems to make a lot of sense. The confusing one, and maybe people smarter than me can figure this out, is top set without, it does bet sometimes. It does, it doesn't bet others. Like, I was trying to figure out the patterns here of like, okay, why are we betting this hand? Ace ace with a flush draw, I guess checks a lot more, but then it doesn't. I can't figure out what aces bet and what aces don't. Maybe someone smarter than me can. I would imagine ace ace queen, more than ace ace normally does, right? Ace ace jack, these hands with straight blockers that you have top set, a gut shot, and a flush draw. Like, okay, that's a really good hand. Even if you get raised and run into queen jack, you're doing okay, and then you can get value from worse sets like king king 10-10. That might also have flush draws as well. Worth noting that like ace ace hands can also check raise all in. So bet, and then say you have ace ace queen. With the flush draw, this hand is going to check raise. It's going to have ace ace queen jack a decent amount, but this hand is worth potting. This is where it gets weird in PLO in that like, is this for value or is this a bluff? I don't know. So when you pot it, right, what calls you, right? Does king king call? I suppose it does, right? So king king with a flush draw and no straight, like, it kind of does. So fair enough. King king 5, I guess, seems to be a hand that calls a lot. So ace ace flush draw no 5 seems like a reasonable check raise in Solverland. I don't know how often is in position betting without a straight. Again, also not entirely sure. I'm going to say not that often, but maybe that's just me. I tend to think that players are quite nitty and just kind of face up with their hands. And so would expect this to go check a lot. And so maybe, I would just straight up bet my ace ace queen with spades, that kind of thing, to get value from worse sets. And, if you get raised with a flush, or if you get raised with a straight, well, you have plenty of equity against that hand. So always a fun one. What are our bluffs? Turns out like worse flush draws, like bad flush draws. So like jack 9 8 7. I'm on the button. I want to be on the gun. So jack 9 8 7 with bad flush cards. This is like a pretty reasonable. We block a jack. We have outs against the set. This is a pretty reasonable bluff. And then like obviously if you bet and you get raised, like you're not. This isn't hold'em where like, oh, I folded a flush draw. Like folding the 9 high flush draw, totally fine, right? Totally fine. And so not that bad. Interesting thing is like a hand like king queen queen 7 checks, depending on how strong our flush draw is, like king queen queen. I would consider this like a pretty reasonable bluff, right? You double block having 2 queens blocks the straight. You block their best set a lot of the time. This seems like you need to get ace 5 to fold, or ace 4 3 to fold, and so it seems like a pretty reasonable bluff. But the solver also check raises this kind of hand pretty often, obviously as a bluff, and so I'm not entirely sure what's betting here that's worse. I would probably just bluff this hand myself, as opposed to going for the check raise. But it's worth noting, solver's totally fine with it. All right, so that's the 10 of spades. Let's take a look at, a straight kind of gets there, but we're not too worried about 2-3. But a flush draw also turns. So now we're going to see that we're value betting literally every set. much more often, right? So ace ace, king king, 5-5, right? These hands are we don't have 4-4 that often, but um, that's worth noting. Ace king hands without a spade bet a lot, right? Um, we're betting to bet fold if we don't have any backup equities. So like, I didn't mean to load 2,000 hands, but it's crashed my computer, whatever. It had like ace king 6-7, ace king queen jack. Um, I wish it would load, but hands that have two hearts, two clubs, um, you unblock the hands that are going to call you that are like ace five with spades or something like that, right? Unfortunately, you have to bet fold those hands. These hands like ace king 6-7 no spade, but uh, ace five no spade also in the same boat where you can get value from worse, like all those like Broadway wraps or open enders, whatever you want to call them, king queen jack 10 type hands. They're still in the mix. King 5 type hands are still in the mix somehow. Like there's a lot of these hands that are worse two pairs that will call a bet. You can fold out bad flush draws like 9 high flush draws. And I think hands like king 9-8-8 with 9 of spades, I think weak players are going to call those hands here. They say I have a pair and flush draw, even though those should be folds. They end up just clicking the call button because pair and flush draw is a really strong hand and hold them and kind of good in PLO. And so you can definitely get value from worse when you bet these hands. So say out of position checks, what is in position doing? Betting with sets, pretty obvious. The lower the set, the more you want to block higher sets. So ace, king, king, obviously a better bet because you block aces from out of position. It's going to check raise you. 5-5. Okay, that's 47% of the time, but now say you have a king. Oh, more. Ace 5-5. Oh, more, right? Just being aware that, like, okay, you block the hands that totally crush you. You have outs against, the sets that do crush you, that kind of thing. And you can get called by, as we just saw, the king, queen, queen type stuff, or king 6-7, ace, king 6-7. You can get called by worse hands. So, not a big deal to just bet those. Flush draws. So say you just have a flush draw. Say you just have like jack 10, 8-7. They tend to want to check back because you're going to get check raised a lot in this spot, not blocking a pair. But if you have ace, king, jack 10, now suddenly we want to bet a little bit more because we can get check raised by a worse hand. Or we're not going to get check raised as often off our equity. So, and we can get called by worse. So that makes sense. All right, and then instead of a straight getting there, we're going to do nothing gets there on the turn, but a flush draw turns. So 8 of spades. Out of position for value. Should be obvious that like all sets kind of want to do this. They kind of all want to bet here. Right, should be pretty straightforward. 2 pair hands that unblock draws. So don't have spade. So you have ace, king, no spade. Bets a lot more, right? Ace, king, eats. No 6, no 7, right? You want to bet. There are some similar hands to the previous board of like bad flush draws that pick up a gutters. So jack 9, 7, 8. Well, you don't really have that hand. So like 9, 7, 6, 4. Fair enough. You have a wrap here. You have like a bad flush draw. Go ahead. And this is the complex thing about PLO. It's like, why is this 9, 7, 6, 4 betting and like this one like? I don't think it really matters if the solver mixes. It's pretty indifferent, so you can just kind of choose based on your opponent. But these are the obvious bluffs, right? Now say out of position checks. What is the in position doing? Again, betting with sets. Pretty obvious. 5-5 with spades, but then suddenly you had an ace in there. Okay, now we're bluffing. We're betting a lot. It's interesting how infrequent 5-5 actually checks a lot if it doesn't have any backups. So 5-5, 6-7 probably bets more. But if you just have like queen 5-5, you're probably just checking it back a lot. Unless you have a flush draw, but that doesn't happen that often. I actually wrote it down here. The interesting thing about this spot is, say you have a hand like King Jack 9-9, um, it prefers to block this hand than a hand like King Jack 10-9, right? It likes having pocket pairs in its hand to bluff. So King Jack 7-7, you can see bluffs all the time. We don't have it that often. This is a pretty infrequent hand to get dealt, but it's going to do that a bit more than King Jack 8-7 with a flush draw, just because I assume because out of position is check calling two pairs a lot, or maybe check calling fives a lot, check calling eights a lot. And so having two more clean outs against that hand increases the equity that we have. So, all right. With that in mind, I think it's time to start looking at some rivers. So basically what I've done is for each of the 3-turn cards, I've selected a single river card. For this most recent sin that we looked at, I'm just going to go in reverse order. So we looked at the 8 of spades turn last. So I'm going to go over that river first. I've selected the 2 of diamonds as the river here. Just kind of saying everything is bricked. Obviously 3-4 gets there, but how worried are we really about 3-4 calling 2 bets? I don't know. So I think it's important to just start looking at. Well, actually, let me take a step back. Let's look at the tree first, right? So essentially, every river is going to be done the same way. Out of position, we'll have a 1/3 pot bet and a pot bet. In position, we'll have half pot and pot. So that's facing a check, obviously. And so let's take a look at out of position's range, right? First thing to notice is we don't really use the 1/3 pot bet like kind of ever here. It's almost entirely pot or check. So that seems to make sense. We don't really have 3-4 here. Obviously, we're potting 3-4 every time we have it, but I mean it's pretty unlikely that we end up with 3-4 in the river. I guess we could block bet ace 3-4 some percentage of the time. Would just pot it. I don't think I would have a 1/3 sizing on this river. So okay. Basically, our 2 pair hands out of position are not quite good enough to value bet, right? So if you look at ace king, 93% check, right? You could just simplify that to pure check. Ace 8, don't look at these because this is ace 8 something, so I should probably do something like this, right? Our 2 pair hands are just not good enough to bet. Our sets tend to be good enough to bet. So our 5-5 hands tend to be good enough to go for it. I don't really know if we ever have deuce that is. I mean, I guess sometimes we get some really weird bluffs here, but for the most part, our value threshold is a set. So we're kind of doing that, and then say we don't have a set, we check. What is in position doing? Pretty bad river from position, right? A lot of their draws brick. They're checking about 70% of the time. So if they have a set, I'm almost certain it's going to have to value bet. Again, worth noting that like they're for the most part just kind of going half pot here, especially if they block an ace or like another pair kind of thing. Just because we could get check raised, that kind of stuff. Getting value from worse here is probably gonna we can't pot a set and expect 2 pair to call, so we kind of have to go a bit smaller. And then say in position is facing half pot. What do we do here? So which one of our 2 pairs calls? Ace king 5. Since in position is mostly gonna be value betting sets, we kind of want to have 2 pair, 3 pair, that kind of stuff. We can check raise ace all in. Obviously against half pot, we'd expect straights to bet pot. So yeah, this all seems to check out. One thing that's worth noting is a hand like ace king 6-3 for out of position, not good enough to value bet. I know we already went over 2 pair, not good enough to value bet. But just understand that we're checking that to check call on rivers. Ace deuce 4-4. This is our worst 2 pair we're gonna have. This check folds, that kind of thing. Interesting noting what happens to say goes check, half pot. Looking at our hands with a king, folding 25% of the time, and without a king, we're folding 84% of the time. So obviously a king is showdown value, so that doesn't tell us too much, right? We're calling when we have more showdown. But I think a lot of this also comes back to in position can have kings, and so we tend to be more aggressive, or we tend to call when we block in positions king X holdings, which is like their most common value bet here for half pot. So just worth noting that. All right, next board. This is the ace king 5-4, so turn did bring in a straight, but it's a 2-3 straight, and then the river I've made the 9 of diamonds, so it's another brick. Essentially, what are we betting for value here? First off, worth noting that out of position on this board significantly better for out of position than it was on the last board. Here was about even on the 8 turn and 2 river. After it goes 4-9, it's very, very slanted in out of position's favor. So we also have some bluffs here, like king jack 10. So these types of hands are gonna king jack 10. These types of hands are going to bluff again, blocking the king, which is going to call. Like pocket kings from in position is going to call. And so, you know, okay, fair enough, right? We want to block our calling ranges. We have some bluffs here that lets us bet pot. Hands like ace ace mostly bet pot. You know, hands that block a 9, hands that block other showdown value, I guess. Hands that block rivered showdown value, I guess, are checking a lot. And hands that unblock that are just potting. So if you go ace ace, the 9 checking 80% of the time, ace ace, no 9, suddenly we're potting, right? That should make sense. King king, you know, kind of, it's also good enough to bet pot, right? We can cooler worse sets, that kind of stuff. Again, with the 9, I mean, I don't think that really matters. It's one combo there. But that seems to make the most sense. And then say, okay, we check what is in position betting. I seem to have forgotten to give them a pot size bet. Whatever, who cares? Probably doesn't matter that much. We can bet most sets here. So say we're 9-9, obviously we're value betting. 4-4, obviously we're value betting. That's the set. And we can have bluffs here again from like king queen jack 3. I mean, king queen jack 3 because that doesn't bluff apparently. But you know, king queen 10 stuff, right? King queen jack 10, that kind of stuff. So yeah, that should make sense. And then again, half pot, you know, what are you calling with a king? With a king, call this all the time. Without, we're folding, right? I don't know if this is because our hands without a king are generally sets, as opposed to like having a king which blocks almost all, like that kind of stuff. But you know, again, a king just seems to be so powerful in terms of like calling or bluffing rivers. So and here it should make sense that like the queen jack 10 hands, they block like the queen jack 10 bluffs that in position is going to have. So these make sense as folds. Ace king type hands without those cards, crystal clear calls, right? And crystal clear check calls because again, we unblock the bluff and we block the value bets. So yeah, that makes sense to me. And then finally, 10 of spades turns, so the straight gets there, Broadway gets there, and then deuce of spades rivers, so spades get there. So this is kind of like the disaster run out for aces, where first we make top set, and then it turns to straight, and then rivers flush, and so we're just like, well, I love having top set in PLO because it always ends great. So what do we do? Again, not really a 1/3 bet pot, not 1/3 pot bet. Doesn't really happen. You kind of need the nut flush or the second nut flush to bet here. So with the king of spades, you know, we're checking this for deception sometimes. I can't piece together the puzzle as why some of these do bet and some of these don't bet. It seems like not having an ace is going to bet here or it's going to check here. Maybe to get a pair to turn itself into a bluff on ace king, you know, ace king 5-4, that kind of stuff, ace king jack 10. Maybe they feel the need to turn themselves into a bluff. And then here when we have an ace, we don't. But I'm not, you know, it's really tough to figure out what's going on, and like that's the tough part for me for PLO is trying to figure out like what the hell's going on. So maybe with an ace, Yes, yeah, I'm just already wrong. Classic. Um, sure. If you can decipher this, you're a genius and you're better at PLO than I am. Um, but that's I can't figure out the ace thing. Something I could figure out is what happens if we have a hand like king, queen, queen. Um, so you know having well, I mean, again, I was gonna say having okay, so having three spades, obviously you're gonna want to bet. You block value bets, like you block bluffs from your opponent with one spade, that kind of thing. Um, Betting without the queen of spades or king queen without the so say we have king queen queen with the king of spades um, and the queen of spades, right? You kind of want to pot when you have both because your opponent's much more likely to check back. When you don't have the queen of spades, you want to check call because you block value bets, you block check raises, that kind of stuff. You put your opponent in a growth spot. Um, so yeah, that's kind of that run out. Say we check. Um, so one thing to note that I feel like this is incredibly gross, and I'm not entirely sure how to play this as a player in my pool. But whenever we have a flush, we just don't fold, right? We're calling 98% of the time, 99% of the time. This is so annoying to me because I just can't imagine calling here and being good enough to like being good at like having the best hand enough of the time, right? That seems very, very tough to do. But it is good to know that like solver approved, like we just flick it in with a flush. You have a better flush, you're a god. Uh, so yeah, that's worth noting. Um, Facing check, um, we basically just pot everything here. We don't really have like a non pot sizing on a polar river like a flush completer. So basically every flush we pot it. Um, we bet slightly more when we don't have an ace. So say we have two spades and we don't have an ace, we're potting it a lot. Say we do have an ace, we're checking slightly less, that kind of stuff. The only thing I can think of there is that like our opponent's supposed to check call aces with a spade, which makes sense, I guess. Um, but yeah, for the most part, when we're betting on this river, we bet pot. If we get potted into, we just kind of side call our flushes because we have a flush. Uh, and yeah, so there we go. Flop turn to river, ace king five rainbow. Looked at a few runouts, looked at a few things, looked at a few turns of rivers. Um, I think the important thing to keep in mind is one, in Solverland, King King matters for a lot for in position. I think we're going to see that on King high boards. That's going to be a big deal too. Um, but in real life or in reality, um, buttons range is going to be a bit wider. So I might start value betting hands like Ace King or something like that on not this board, but the other boards where a flush hasn't completed or a straight hasn't completed, that kind of thing. Just knowing that sometimes players are going to be like, oh, I have two pair, I call, type of thing, or like, I two pair the flush on this, I'm going to call. Um, Whereas the solver is going to check call them or do some magic around having the king block or that kind of thing. Uh, but yeah, there we go. Ace King 5 Rainbow, PLO. Hopefully more of these to come. I would be happy if I did one of these a week, but my goal really is to do two boards a week. So yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. And if someone has a specific board, feel free to request. But other than that, I'm just going to keep trucking. Thanks.